In October 2024, a thick fog blanketed the Braga Bridge over the Taunton River, where the flashing police lights reflected on the cold water. Beneath the bridge, Detective Verena Holt's flashlight beam cut through the black mud, illuminating a metallic object deep in the riverbed. Central Command, I need a forensics team here immediately. We may have just found what disappeared 17 years ago. Her voice crackled over the radio, echoing between the sound of waves and the wind blowing from Fall River. What began as a routine cold case file review had become an unforeseen turning point, one that would reawaken the case that haunted Massachusetts for nearly 2 decades. Inside the black nylon bag hauled from the river, technicians found a mud-caked Glock 17, its serial number filed off, but intact DNA evidence remained. That gun was once central to File 07411, the disappearance and presumed murder of 20-year-old Aiden Calloway, who vanished mysteriously from a funeral service at St. Mary's Church, Fall River. The case caused an uproar, then quickly faded into silence, leaving behind only rumors, faded tire tracks, and a cold note in the file. Unsolved, pending lead. For 17 years, Aiden's name was merely a scratch in the memory of a small town. But now, with AI image restoration, TouchDNA, and 3D crime scene modeling, the case is rewriting itself. The old evidence, black paint residue, gray polyester fibers, and a 9mm bullet casing, is beginning to tell a story no one dared to believe, that the killer never left. As Holt turned the pages of Detective Dempsey's old file, she realized this was not just an investigation into a death. It was a dialogue between past and present, between technology and memory, between people and justice. And when the Taunton River finally spoke, it did not just reveal a culprit, it also exposed the silence that Fall River had concealed for 17 years. This is the story of a forgotten case, a detective who refused to give up, and the voice of the missing given back by science. Where are you watching from today? Leave your location in the comments below. Tonight we go back to the fall of 2007, tracing Massachusetts' most haunting disappearance and witnessing justice, after 17 years of being buried, rise to speak for Aiden Calloway. This is a story of silence, memory, and justice delayed, but never denied. Before diving deep into this shocking true story, let us know where you are watching from, and if you love journeys in search of forgotten justice, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. A Fall River morning laid a thin layer of mist over the old brick houses. The St. Mary's Church bell tolled steadily in the damp, cold air, its sound carrying far down the small street lined with yellow maples. Inside the sanctuary, the scent of candles mixed with old wood created the somber stillness of a funeral service. The pews were crowded with people saying goodbye to a local young man. Friends and relatives spoke in low voices, nodding in greeting in the dim light, filtering through the stained glass. Amidst the crowd, Aiden Calloway, a 20-year-old man, in a simple black suit, bowed his head in prayer for a moment, then stood up. He smiled and greeted a few acquaintances, exchanged a few pleasantries, and then walked out a side door leading to a secondary yard. One witness recalled him pulling a phone from his pocket and holding it to his ear, walking unhurriedly. Another said they saw him walking along the red brick corridor toward the church's back parking lot, where a line of cars stretched into the mist. Inside, the service continued with the deep tones of the organ. No one noticed the empty space where Aiden had been sitting. Then suddenly a shout rang out from the yard, making those near the door turn around. The wooden door swung open, and the cold wind blew in, bringing with it a chaotic murmuring. People rushed out. Some said they saw a figure bolt past the trees, others suggested someone had simply slipped. The commotion lasted a moment, then faded, and no one understood what had just happened. When the service concluded, as the crowd dispersed, Ruth Calloway, Aiden's mother, realized her son had not returned. She searched the grounds, asking everyone he had just spoken with, but no one knew where he had gone. The seat where he sat still had his small prayer book, showing no sign of haste. Ruth and her daughter Isla walked along the corridor, calling his name amidst the wind whistling through the tree canopy, then circled to the back parking lot, empty, no one in sight. The ground was covered in thin mist, only faint footprints mingled with the dry leaves. As time passed, the last attendees left the church, leaving only the Calloway family standing in the hazy gray afternoon light. Ruth gripped her phone, looked around once more, then dialed the emergency number. Her voice trembled as she told the dispatcher that her son had disappeared in the middle of the morning, right at the funeral. The phone rang long in the Fall River Police Department's dispatch room. The duty officer logged the information, requested that the scene be preserved, and immediately transferred the call to the Criminal Investigation Division. An emergency alert was sent through the internal system. The duty lieutenant ordered the quick response team to coordinate with the Bristol County Investigation Office. Detective Arthur Dempsey, with over 20 years of experience investigating violent crimes, took command. By the time his vehicle arrived, the twilight had painted the church grounds a cold gray. Curious crowds retreated from the new yellow tape strung around the gate, while a few funeral goers still lingered, their faces pale, not yet understanding what had occurred. Dempsey stepped out, his eyes sweeping the ancient grounds, then settling on the trembling woman sitting on the steps. Ruth Calloway. She recounted the events briefly, her voice still choked. Aiden went out during the service, said he would be back in a few minutes, and then no one saw him again. A few people said they heard a shout. Some claimed they saw two figures in black clothing leave. Dempsey listened, scribbling notes in his pad, then signaled for the crime scene technicians to begin their work. Cameras flashed constantly as technicians scoured every square meter around the side exit. The thin, damp layer of mist on the red brick pavement revealed several distinct shoe prints, heading toward the back parking lot. Two different sole types, one large and one small, overlapped. A few steps away, they found three brass shell casings, scattered a short distance apart. No blood, no signs of a struggle. Dempsey knelt to observe, asking for the shoe prints to be marked and cast immediately before the mist dissipated. While the technical team worked, he gathered the witnesses near the side door for re-questioning. A middle-aged woman said she heard a metallic impact, followed by a scream. A young man said he saw two dark shadows running past the line of trees. Another person recalled the sound of a car engine starting and tires squealing on the gravel. The testimonies conflicted on details, but were consistent that within a few brief minutes, Aiden vanished without anyone knowing how. Police searched the area around the church, checking every corner of the yard and along the fence. A young officer discovered the secondary gate slightly ajar, its hinge creaking in the wind. The path behind the gate led out to a small street connecting directly toward the Braga Bridge, the route out of town. Dempsey paused, looking at the disturbed gravel, forming the hypothesis that someone had exploited that very secluded path to leave unnoticed. The VHS tapes from nearby cameras were collected immediately afterward. One from the flower shop across the street, two from a bank ATM near the intersection, and one from the church parking lot. The images were blurry, distorted, and faded. Playing them back, Dempsey saw the reflection of a dark, glossy object, possibly a car body turning onto the main street. The angle was too far to read the license plate, but the reflecting headlights indicated the car was relatively new. He rewound and fast-forwarded, noting the frame that matched the time the witness claimed to hear the shout. When the work at the scene concluded, all evidence was sealed: shell casings, shoe print casts, soil samples, and scene photo. In the yard, the final flash of camera light flickered and died. Dempsey sat back in the command car, reviewing his notes. Aiden was last seen at the side door, a few minutes before the shout. After that, no one saw him, only the shadow of a black sedan leaving the area. He exited the car, looking back at the church complex now engulfed in darkness. Inside, the candles were out, leaving only the smell of burnt wax and faint incense smoke. At the end of a pew, Ruth Calloway still sat silently, her hands clutching her son's jacket. Dempsey nodded slightly, then opened his notebook and wrote the conclusion for the initial report. Possibility: kidnapping or targeted attack. Victim: Aiden Calloway. Outside the yard, the wind from the river blew strong, making the yellow tape rustle lightly, the police car lights sweeping across the wet road, reflecting on the gray stone wall. The entire neighborhood fell silent again, only the faint static of the radio in the patrol car, and the feeling that something very wrong was beginning in this usually quiet place. When Detective Arthur Dempsey left the St. Mary's Church grounds, the yellow tape still swayed in the wind, and police lights splashed across the wet road. He sat motionless in his car for a moment, his eyes fixed on the dark river in the distance. The intuition of a seasoned professional told him this story was far from over. A young person couldn't vanish completely amidst a crowd without leaving a trace, unless someone had planned for it beforehand. The next morning the search expansion order was approved. Rescue team pickup trucks lined up toward the residential area around the church, carrying detectors, high-powered lamps, and several specially trained police dogs. The air was thick with the damp smell of earth and grass. Dempsey stood at the top of the street, silently watching the officers fan out, each group responsible for an area of the residential neighborhood around the church, the tree-lined path leading to the backyard, and the stretch of the Taunton River bank winding around the town. He only gave the team leader a brief instruction: find what others don't want us to see. Barks echoed from the church's backyard as a dog sniffed a strange scent. Forensic personnel knelt down, finding the soil lightly disturbed, with a long skid mark from a tire on the damp ground. A fresh trail, the tread clearly visible. Dempsey knelt, touched the tip of a pencil to the edge of the groove, measured the distance between the two tracks, and made a note. The track was large enough for a sedan, heading toward the river's edge. There were no metal fragments or oil stains, but the ground was darkly stained in a low spot, making him pause longer than usual. The technical team brought a handheld sonar device. Two divers, wearing oxygen tanks, lowered themselves into the murky water, sweeping for large objects on the river bottom. The sonar screen showed fragmented white spots, mostly just rocks and industrial debris. After nearly an hour, they surfaced, shaking their head. No car, no other hard objects. Dempsey looked down at the rippling water, feeling as if the river was hiding something that human tools weren't sensitive enough to reach. On the bank, the second rescue team walked along the low-lying strip of land behind the residential area. They turned over every clump of grass, shone lights into the dark corners, but found no trace of Aiden. A young officer reported finding a small piece of black plastic under the wet leaves, appearing to be a broken car trim. Dempsey took it, examined it, then nodded to seal it. The plastic piece was thin and old, possibly unrelated, but he didn't overlook any detail. As the work continued, flyers with Aiden Calloway's photo were printed and distributed throughout the area. The picture showed him in his school basketball uniform, his gaze bright and calm. Local residents took the flyers in silence, some shaking their heads, a few whispering that they, too, had attended Mass at St. Mary's for years and had never heard of anything like this. A sense of unease gradually spread through the small town, as if the boundary between peace and danger had just been torn. As the search team moved toward the Braga Bridge, Dempsey ordered a review of traffic cameras on the road leading out of town. The footage showed a few black cars passing, but the distant angle and poor lighting made reading license plates impossible. He requested that all data be saved for later review, while marking the bridge and the river road as the most probable route for leaving the scene. Radio chatter mingled with the wind, interspersed with barks and the sound of boots stepping on wet mud. An officer brought back a sealed bag containing a few strands of gray fabric recovered near the iron fence, so small that tweezers were needed to pick them up. Dempsey examined them closely and instructed that they be kept, even if the possibility of coincidence was high. He knew well, in an investigation, seemingly insignificant details can become the key when correctly pieced together. Late in the afternoon, the rescue team concluded their first session. There were no concrete results beyond the tire tracks, the plastic fragment, and a few pieces of fabric. Dempsey stood looking at the map taped to the hood of the command vehicle, where red markers dotted the riverbank. Everything stopped at an invisible boundary where the water began to deepen and flow rapidly. He knew finding further evidence there was now a race against luck. As everyone packed up their equipment, Dempsey took his notebook and wrote the final line for the report to his superiors. No body or vehicle discovered. Temporary conclusion. The victim was likely transported by car, heading toward the Braga Bridge area. Case file transitioned to missing person with suspected foul play. Before getting into the car, he looked back at the river one last time. The water slowly coiled under the weak yellow streetlights, the surface strangely still, as if nothing had ever happened. But Dempsey knew clearly somewhere, something had slipped away in the night before, leaving behind muddy streaks and the cold silence of a case that had just officially begun. In the days following the initial search, the town of Fall River gradually returned to its usual quiet, But for Detective Arthur Dempsey, the silence only amplified his frustration. He remained convinced that Aiden Calloway's disappearance could not have ended in an empty river, though they had scoured the entire length of the Taunton, and sonar and divers had found nothing. There was still something undiscovered, as if the water had swallowed all the evidence whole. Then one grim morning, the thing he both awaited and feared most finally arrived. A local fisherman reported to the police that he had found something caught in debris floating in Mount Hope Bay, where the Taunton River empties into the sea. When the Coast Guard arrived, they saw an object drifting sluggishly amidst weeds and plastic refuse. As they approached, the brackish, damp smell of decomposition became distinct. It was the body of a young man. The body was bloated, and the dark clothing was saturated with mud and algae. Fishermen stood silently watching as police cordoned off the dock, and Dempsey was called to the scene immediately. He arrived wearing a heavy coat, the wind off the bay stinging his face. The scene was bleak, the choppy water reflecting a leaden color. The Marine police had secured the body with a rope, awaiting the forensic team. As the gurney was pulled up from the water's edge, Dempsey immediately recognized the faded black suit, the same kind Aiden wore on the day of the funeral. He said nothing, only giving a slight nod when he saw the silver wristwatch on the victim's wrist. The one Ruth Calloway had described in the missing person report. The body was placed on a large tarp. Technicians wearing gloves bent down to take photographs and collect samples around the area. Thick mud and sand clung to the water's edge, mixed with fragments of plastic debris. An officer pointed to a small fleck of black paint on the victim's coat lapel, small but appearing to be metallic. They carefully separated it, placing it in a sealed bag. A few steps away, another technician discovered a silvery gray thread wrapped around a submerged blade of grass, a synthetic fiber, strange compared to the victim's clothing material. Everything was collected, meticulously numbered, and its exact position noted. Dempsey watched silent. He knew well that these tiny samples might be the only things that could tell them what truly happened. Beside him, the technical team noted no signs of anchoring or tying. The body appeared to have been floating freely in the water for days before getting caught in this area. That meant the disposal point was elsewhere, possibly farther up the river to the north, where the search team had stopped their sonar. When the scene processing was complete, they transferred the body to the dedicated forensic vehicle. The wind from the bay blew fiercely, carrying the smell of salt and metal, chilling him to the bone beneath his collar. Dempsey followed, watching the white van's silhouette fade, his heart sinking. Everything he had feared was true. Aiden Calloway was gone, and now he faced the harder question: who would cause such a gentle young man to die this way? The Mount Hope dock area was quickly sealed off. Curious residents gathered behind the barrier, trying to look over the police officers' shoulders. The news spread rapidly, and the local press arrived just hours later. Before the cameras, Dempsey refused to comment in detail. He only said briefly, "We have found a body and are working to confirm the identity." But in his heart he had no doubt. Everything matched: the drift position, the clothing, the watch, and the time of floating. Exactly 3 weeks since the disappearance. On the way back to the precinct, he opened his notebook, writing a new line under case file 07411. Male body found at Mount Hope Bay, suspected missing victim Aiden Calloway. Need confirmation via fingerprints and dental record. The car rattled slightly over the uneven gravel-strewn road. Outside, the sky was solid gray, and rain began to speckle the windshield, mixing with the sound of waves crashing against the stone seawall. Upon arriving at the state medical examiner's office, the technical team was already waiting. They moved the body into the cold room, preparing for identification and autopsy. Dempsey handed over all the samples, along with the scene report and the precise coordinates of the discovery location. He signed the log, left the room, but stood in the hallway for a long time, looking through the opaque glass where the doctors were examining every detail on the body. In his mind, all the case fragments snapped into a clearer picture. This disappearance was never a typical missing persons case. Someone had waited for the right time, the right place to act, and the river had hidden that secret for nearly a month, before finally returning a cold body along with hundreds of unanswered questions. Across the city, Ruth Calloway received the call informing her of the body's discovery. She did not scream or cry, only staying silent for a long time, then asking a single question: "Is it him?" The police could not answer with certainty, but everyone knew the story of Aiden Calloway, the young man who vanished during a funeral service, had now turned to a new chapter, the chapter of death, and of the real investigation beginning. In the Massachusetts State Medical Examiner's office, cold white light reflected off the shiny tiled walls, and the characteristic smell of disinfectant permeated the hallway. Inside, Miriam Keats, the State Department of Health's forensic expert, wearing a faded gray scrub suit, prepared for a new autopsy. She didn't need to reread the file to know who the victim was. The name Aiden Calloway had been in the news for the past 3 weeks. But when the sheet was pulled back, the water-bloated face still made her pause for a few seconds. There was something distinct about the stillness of the deceased, especially when that person had been the focus of such a mysterious disappearance. Detective Arthur Dempsey stood in the corner of the room observing. He was accustomed to the smell of formalin and the dry sound of metal hitting a tray, but this time everything carried a heavier personal feeling. Dempsey knew that in this very room the first answers would either be found or lost forever. Dr. Keats began her work with an external examination. The male body, approximately 20 years old, 6 feet tall, with a fit physique. The skin was pale gray from prolonged water immersion, with minor abrasions on the elbows and knees. On the left shoulder, a deep circular hole tore through the vest and shirt beneath. She carefully cut around the wound area, revealing darkened, neatly torn skin, a characteristic sign of a bullet wound at medium range. When she turned the body over, Keats noted the bullet's path angled downward, penetrating the left shoulder, fracturing part of the scapula, and stopping in the right back muscle. Under the examination light, the wound was discolored, with a slight burn mark around the edges, indicating the victim was shot from a distance of only a few meters. She carefully incised the tissue, using forceps to retrieve a small caliber copper bullet, placing it on a metal tray. Dempsey stepped closer, watching the bullet spin under the light. $9 tissimix, a common round owned by both police and civilians. "Is this the only shot?" he asked. Keats nodded, her eyes fixed on the metal tray. "One shot, no signs of other bullets, but enough to cause rapid blood loss." Continuing the examination, she noticed extended abrasions and bruising on both wrists, with deep subdermal hemorrhage, suggesting the victim had been dragged or held tightly while unconscious. There were no ligature marks, but the frictional force left a distinctive scratch pattern, as if his hands had been firmly gripped and pulled across a hard surface. There was also a faint bruise on the right hip, possibly from impact during a fall. The lungs were dissected. Keats opened the chest cavity and observed closely. The lung tissue was dry, with no sign of frothing or water, confirming the victim did not drown. The body was submerged only after death. She noted this in neat handwriting: no water in lungs. Post-mortem submersion. Upon removing the vest and shirt, Keats found dark stains on the sleeves and shoulder. Under the optical microscope, the fabric fibers adhering to it sparkled with a faint blue reflection, a type of synthetic polyester fiber often used for car interior. She used tweezers to collect the sample, placing it in a test tube labeled Fiber Sample A. There was also the metallic black paint residue on the shoulder. Keats lightly touched it with a testing pen, finding the paint hard and glossy. That detail made Dempsey pause. Could be from a vehicle. She did not reply, only quickly writing, metallic paint residue, black, possible automotive origin. All samples, paint, fiber, bullet, were sealed separately, sent for material and ballistics analysis. Keats knew these would tell more than any state. During the final check, she estimated the time of death to be approximately 2 to 3 days after Aiden's disappearance, based on the degree of tissue decomposition and signs of water immersion. That meant he was not killed immediately at the church, but was held somewhere, then shot and dumped. She looked over at Dempsey, who stood with his arms crossed, his face still but his eyes shadowed. "You see," she said quietly, "this was not a spontaneous shooting. Someone knew exactly what they were doing." Dempsey did not respond. He looked at the steel slab where the small pieces of evidence were neatly arranged under the fluorescent lights. Each item carried a fragment of the story: the bullet through the shoulder, the dragging marks, the car paint, the polyester fiber. Each piece, cold yet precise, assembled into the image of a deliberate crime, meticulously staged. When Keats removed her gloves and signed the final log, Dempsey read the provisional conclusion she had written: cause of death, gunshot wound to left shoulder, manner, Homicide. Time of death: approximately 48 to 72 hours after disappearance. Additional findings: metallic paint residue, synthetic fiber, polyester, no evidence of drowning. These words were printed on paper as stark as the bullet that pierced Aiden's shoulder. But for Dempsey they carried the weight of the truth. A truth he knew would drag with it many other layers of darkness. Before leaving the autopsy room, he glanced back one last time through the glass. The body was covered again with the white sheet, the ceiling lights faintly reflected on the still face. One part of the job was done, but now the real investigation was just beginning. Outside the rain still fell lightly, the wind gusting through the bare trees in the yard. Dempsey hurried to his car, feeling the chill seep through his coat. He started the engine, jotting a few lines in his notebook. Aiden Calloway, shot, not drowned. Paint and fiber suggest vehicle involvement. Next step, trace. The car rolled out of the forensic facility, headlights cutting through the rain. In the damp, dim cabin, Dempsey heard the engine's steady hum like the rhythm of the case, slowly coming alive. Carrying a clear premonition, the road to the killer had just opened, and it would take him further than ever before. When the autopsy report landed on his desk, Detective Arthur Dempsey read it 3 times, sentence by sentence. Every detail reinforced his hunch. This was a planned murder. Aiden Calloway was shot at close range, did not drown, and his body was dumped in the water to conceal the crime. But as he began to follow up on every lead, Dempsey soon realized he was up against a blank wall. The case seemed designed to leave nothing behind. The ballistics report arrived first. Analysis of the bullet, retrieved by Dr. Keats, identified it as $9 Sinian Luger, the most common type of round in civilian shootings. The rifling marks on the bullet were smooth, bearing no characteristic signs of a registered barrel. The specialist compared the sample with the National IBIS database, but found no match. This meant the gun used to shoot Aiden had never been legally recorded in the system. It could be a black market weapon, or a stolen one. Both possibilities led to a dead end. Dempsey filled out the preliminary report: ballistics no match, firearm unidentified. He then leaned back in his chair, staring at the photo of the body on his desk. One bullet wound, dragging marks, black paint, polyester fiber, each piece in place, yet nothing connected them into a complete picture. The next hope lay with the camera systems around the church area. The forensic technology team reprocessed the VHS tapes his unit had collected earlier. Zooming in on a frame from the ATM camera near the church, they saw a dark-colored car moving towards the Braga Bridge, its body reflecting the sunlight, the silhouette of the driver briefly visible. The image quality was blurry, the license plate unreadable, but the size, height, and tail shape suggested it was a mid-sized sedan, possibly a Hyundai, Honda, or Chevrolet manufacturer. Dempsey requested the vehicle registration department to cross-reference data within a 5-mile radius of the church, filtering for black cars matching the description. The results returned 9 vehicles. He and a young officer checked each address in turn. The first 3 were family cars, intact in the garage. 4 others had been sold or transferred ownership long ago. The remaining 2 were damaged, but did not match the body style and tail in the video. After 2 days of scouring, all hope vanished. None matched the shadowy car. The DNA analysis report from the state lab came last, and it was the blow that discouraged the entire team. Tissue and cell samples collected from Aiden's body were severely degraded due to prolonged water immersion. All attempts to isolate foreign DNA failed. The results only showed the victim's own genetic sequence. No sign of another person on the body, no hair samples, no viable epithelial cells. Dempsey read the cold, italicized conclusion from the forensic specialist: no foreign DNA detected. He folded the report, leaning against the chair. The sound of rain outside the window was incessant. Cases like this always exhausted him, not because of the brutality, but because of the silence of the evidence. Every trace was faint, every lead stopped at the border of suspicion. Aiden was shot, but the gun was unknown. A car left the scene, but its shadow dissolved into the fog. In the river there was nothing left but water and sand. The brief meeting with the investigative team yielded nothing more. Officers reported that witnesses at the funeral had been re-interviewed, but their testimonies remained contradictory. One insisted on hearing a loud engine noise, Another said it was only the wind. No one clearly saw the faces of the two people in dark clothing. No one saw which direction the car went. The crime scene photos only showed shell casings, shoe prints, and the old stone wall with a few faint scratches. No direct evidence pointed to the culprit. In a final effort, Dempsey had the technical department analyze the black paint residue on the victim's coat. The result, the paint sample had metallic components similar to the type used in glossy black automotive coatings, but this only confirmed what he already knew, that Aiden had been in contact with a vehicle. This type of paint was used on hundreds of thousands of different cars, rendering it completely useless for identification. Dempsey sat alone in his office after everyone had left. The tired yellow light fell on the thick case file. He reopened the scene photos, tire skid marks, the murky river, the low-lying bank. Everything was like fragmented shards of glass, reflecting the cold light of disappointment. He added to the log, "No new leads, insufficient forensic evidence to proceed." Before turning off the light, he looked again at the map pinned to the wall. The route from the church to Mount Hope Bay was marked heavily in red pen. A short journey, less than 10 kilometers, but it took 3 weeks for the body to drift there, and it seemed like a lifetime to find the person who caused it to happen. As he left the office, Dempsey paused in the hallway, hearing the rain drum on the glass. He thought of Ruth Calloway, the mother still waiting for an explanation he could not yet provide. In his notebook he wrote a single, short sentence, the note that concluded the first phase of the investigation. Case stalled. Evidence incomplete. Further action pending. New lead. The office door closed, leaving behind the faint light and a case slowly going cold, though the obsession with it still smoldered within the old detective, like the bullet still lodged somewhere in the left shoulder of a young man who never had the chance to return. For the next few weeks, the investigation team's final efforts only prolonged the silence. Every specimen, every video clip, every piece of testimony was reviewed dozens of times, but the results were a sterile loop. No new witnesses, no leads surfaced from the damp mud of Fall River. Everything in Aiden Calloway's case gradually went cold, like the Taunton River still flowing slowly outside Detective Arthur Dempsey's office window, steady, cold, and echoing nothing. The crime lab sent an additional forensic report, but it brought nothing new. The black paint sample collected from the victim's jacket was identified as a common industrial paint used for many car models from 2005-2007, making specific identification impossible. The gray polyester fiber was no better. It was a common material for hundreds of different car upholstery samples. No fingerprints, no DNA, no license plate, no witnesses. In the summary report, the stark sentence stood out in the conclusion: insufficient evidence to identify suspect or vehicle. Dempsey sat silently in his office, flipping through the worn-edged case files. He looked up at the board with Aiden's photo in the center, surrounded by maps, a crime scene diagram, the black plastic piece, shoe print photos, and shell casing images, all of it pieced together an incomplete picture, with a void at its center. Every time he looked at it, he felt like he was standing in a fog, touching a shape, but never reaching the truth. He had done everything within his power, cross-referenced the stolen weapons database, tracked out-of-state vehicle registrations, even contacted repair shops in the outskirts, to ask about a black sedan with scratches or new paint, but the answers were all the same. No one remembered. No one. In a small town, rumors spread faster than evidence. People started saying that Aiden was involved in something shady, that the disappearance was not random. Dempsey hated that kind of talk, but he also understood, when there is no truth, people create a story to fill the gap. The pressure from superiors grew, the investigation budget was cut, and priority shifted to new cases with progress. The file, case 07411, was almost 200 pages thick, but it was all protocols and no match result. An internal meeting was held, and the division chief announced that the case was being temporarily suspended until new leads emerged. Dempsey sat still in the corner of the room, saying nothing. He understood this was the temporary outcome for all deadlocked cases. No one declared defeat, but everyone tacitly understood that the door had closed. That evening he returned to the crime scene alone. St. Mary's Church was quiet, only the streetlights shone on the stained glass windows. He walked along the parking lot, past the iron fence where the shoe print was found, and stopped by the path leading to the river. A thin drizzle fell, the smell of damp earth and decaying grass mingled in the air. Everything was the same as the first day, except now no one paid attention. What was once the focus of an investigation was now just an abandoned lot, overgrown with grass and littered with trash. Dempsey stood looking at the water, listening to the river lapping the shore. In that moment, he felt the case was like the water itself, constantly flowing, but never taking him anywhere. He remembered Ruth Calloway's face during the body identification, dry eyes, hands tightly clutching her son's wool scarf. He had promised to find the answer. Now that promise became a heavy burden on his mind. When he returned to his car, he opened his notebook, writing the final short entry under the update section, evidence insufficient, case inactive. As the ink dried, he closed the notebook, like closing a door. A few days later, the file was moved to the Bristol County Archives. On the cover, a red stamp was prominent. Unsolved, pending lead. The collection of documents was placed in cabinet number 3, among hundreds of other files that had slept for years. Aiden's photos, the maps, Dempsey's notes, all were sealed in an envelope, awaiting an opportunity no one knew when it would arrive. As he left the archive room, Dempsey paused at the door, glancing at the row of cold metal cabinets. Each compartment held a story without an ending. Each unsolved label was an unfulfilled promise. He sighed softly, walking down the long corridor, the fluorescent light casting a faint glare on the floor. Outside the sky darkened, and the wind from the river returned, carrying the cold of the water and the smell of salt. Fall River was still noisy, cars still drove over the Braga Bridge, and Aiden Calloway's case slowly faded into oblivion. But for Arthur Dempsey, it never truly ended. Every time he drove past the river, he still looked down, imagining he might see the shadow of the black vest drifting in the water. And though the file was closed, a part of him still knew the truth lay somewhere beneath the cold mud, just waiting to be pulled to the surface one day. From the day case file 07411 was moved to the Bristol County Archives, everything fell silent. The iron door closed, the rows of file cabinets lined up like gravestones of stories without an ending. Among hundreds of numbered documents, Aiden Calloway's case was just a sealed envelope, the words unsolved pending lid fading with time and dust. People who had been involved in the investigation gradually transferred, some retired, and the remaining clues were buried under layers of new paperwork. Detective Arthur Dempsey remained with the department for a few more years. He worked on several major cases, mentored young detectives, but every time he crossed the Braga Bridge, he glanced down at the Taunton River. The water still flowed, carrying the same steady sound, only in his memory the river was always mixed with the image of the young man in the black vest. On rare nights off duty, he sat in his kitchen, reopening the old leather notebook, where the final lines were written, evidence insufficient, case inactive. Each time he read it, he felt regret like an unhealed scar. Then he submitted his retirement papers, leaving Fall River to live with his wife in the suburb of Attleboro. A small house, a yard full of maple trees, peaceful enough for old age. But in the drawer of his desk, the old map of Aiden's case still lay there. Dempsey couldn't throw it away. He had folded it up, intending to put it in the trash, but stopped midway. Cases like that, he thought, never truly end. They only pause when the last person stops thinking about them. At the Bristol County Police Headquarters, Aiden Calloway's name was almost never mentioned. Younger officers knew about the case only through a few lines in the database. Male, 20 years old, victim of an unidentified homicide suspect. They read, typed the command to update the status, and moved on to the next file. No one asked questions. In the 2010s, the volume of cases rapidly increased, staffing decreased, and budgets were cut. The investigative system was only capable of pursuing new cases, while the old files slept in the archive, dozens, then hundreds of unresolved homicide cases, accumulating year after year. At the state level, Massachusetts established the State Police Cold Case Unit, specializing in unsolved cases, but scarce resources meant they only selected files with high potential. Aiden Calloway's case was not on the priority list. No DNA, no witnesses, no usable physical evidence. It was categorized as low evidentiary value, a file only to be reviewed if new analysis technology emerged, or if someone confessed, and no one confessed. Occasionally a local reporter would seek out the archive, asking to review old cases for a feature story. They would flip through the covers, pause at Aiden's photo with his youthful gaze, ask a few cursory questions, and then close the file. The case had nothing fresh to tell. No exciting plot, no concealed killer, no cinematic twists, just a person shot, a river, and a blank ending. After each time, the file was pushed back into the old cabinet, silent for a bit longer. Years passed, technology changed, the world changed. New cases were solved with DNA, with digital databases, with things no one in 2007 could have imagined. But case 074, the file card was yellowed, the paper cover frayed. In the State Investigation Division's general catalog, it was just one line in a list of over 300 unsolved cases of the Massachusetts State Police. In Attleboro, Dempsey still kept the habit of reading the news every morning. Whenever he saw the phrase "cold case solved" in the newspaper, he would pause longer, his gaze distant. He knew he would never do that again, no longer having the authority, the team, or the energy, but the memory of Aiden clung to him. Some nights his wife would find him sitting by the kitchen table, looking at the old photos from the case. "You still can't let go?" she would ask. He would just shake his head, softly replying, "It's not exactly that I can't let go, it's just that I still owe him an explanation." And in Fall River, St. Mary's Church still stood as it was. Annually, Ruth Calloway still visited in October, placing a bouquet of white flowers on the steps, and leaving quietly. For her, time didn't diminish the pain, only silenced. The community gradually forgot. People talked about new cases, other deaths, other news stories, but in a small corner of the city, a thin file still lay there, a witness to oblivion. 16 years after the Taunton River returned Aiden's body, dust covered the cold metal cabinet, and the file label was fading. The unsolved stamp darkened with time, but no one noticed. The outside world had changed. Only the dormant cases remained unchanged. And then, in early 2024, when a new state program was launched, the Cold Case Reinvestigation Project, the list of old cases was brought up for review. Among the hundreds of files, a young assistant in the forensic office happened to mistakenly pull out a heavy, dusty old file. On the cover, the words were smudged, but still legible. Case 07411, Aiden Calloway. A case thought to be dead had just been called by name once again. 27 years had passed since Aiden Calloway's body was recovered in Mount Hope Bay. The story of the young man who disappeared during a funeral service had sunk deep into Fall River's memory, only living quietly in fragments of yellowed newspapers and a dust-covered sealed file in the Bristol County cold storage. No one mentioned it anymore, until the state of Massachusetts launched a new program called the Cold Case Reinvestigation Project. The federally funded project aimed to test modern forensic technologies on old cases that had previously reached a deadlock due to insufficient evidence. When the list of hundreds of unsolved cases was sent out, Case 07411, Aiden Calloway fell into the testing group. Not because it was more promising than others, but simply because all its data, the VHS tape, paint samples, bullet fragments, jacket fabric, were still perfectly preserved, having never been destroyed. Detective Verena Holt, 40 years old, from the Massachusetts State Police Cold Case Division, was assigned to take charge. She was a person of the new century, practical, disciplined, and believing in the power of technology more than intuition. Upon receiving the file, Holt opened the thin, yellowed old document, turning the pages of Dempsey's handwritten notes. The handwriting was bold, neat, and detailed, a different language from today's electronic report. On the last page, his final words remained, "Evidence insufficient, case inactive." She paused for a long moment, as if reading the testament of someone who had walked a half-generation before her. Holt went down to the evidence storage with two technicians. The metal cabinets, lined up in the dim white light. The storage clerk pulled out a sealed box, labeled. When opened, the smell of old plastic and damp paper escaped. Inside were all the remnants of the case, a VHS tape, the victim's black vest, paint and polyester fiber samples in glass tubes, and a 9mm bullet fragment in a metal evidence bag. She put on gloves, lifting each object as if touching a fragment of someone else's distant memory. Returning to her office, Holt began to rearrange all the evidence in logical order. She opened the digital file, scanned every handwritten page, and imported Dempsey's data into the state's new Forensic Integration Database, FID system. In the Materials Not Processed section, she discovered something that surprised her, a series of data that had never been digitized. The crime scene video clips, photos of shoe prints, and copies from the 2007 ATM camera still existed only on magnetic tape, never backed up onto a server. This meant that all the images of the case had only ever been viewed with the naked eye, never enhanced, image stabilized or recovered with software. Holt looked at the old tapes, lying silently in the box, the label edges faded, Dempsey's handwritten note, ATM, October 07 still visible. She sighed softly, then ordered the technicians to restore the data. The tape-to-digital converter spun slowly, emitting a familiar whirring sound. The black screen displayed shaky frames, filled with white noise, but Holt recognized this was the clip Dempsey mentioned in his notes. Black car, leaving the area, heading toward Braga Bridge. The only sound in the room was the steady running of the machine. Holt watched intently, letting the AI forensic enhancer software process each frame, clarifying contrast and reducing noise. 10 minutes later, the image became clearer. In the middle of the frame, the black car gradually emerged, a four-door sedan, long body, curved rear, reflecting the sunlight. On the license plate, a faint sequence of characters appeared, 9M3, then disappeared as the car turned out of the frame. Holt paused, rewound, trying to read more, not enough to confirm, but enough to reopen a door that no one had opened for 17 years. She noted, recovered partial plate 9M3, direction, southbound to Braga Bridge, vehicle black mid-size sedan, likely 2006, 2007 Hyundai Elantra, or similar. Immediately after, Holt requested the DMV database department to trace all registered vehicles matching the first three characters, manufactured between 2005-2008, within Bristol County. The list returned 21 cars, but only a few still existed in current record. That afternoon, Holt continued to examine Aiden's vest. Under the modern magnifying light and microscope, she found the metallic black paint layer Dempsey had described had faded to gray. She performed Raman spectroscopy, a technology that was not yet common in 2007, and saved the data. The automated analysis suggested that the paint contained reflective mica powder and aluminum compounds, characteristic of automotive coatings for certain Korean car models during the mid-2000s. It was a strangely consistent detail with the sedan in the video. While the technician recorded the results, Holt reopened Dr. Miriam Keats' original report. Every word was still precise, scientific, and cold as if newly written, gunshot wound to left shoulder, homicide, paint residue consistent with automotive source. Below it, Dempsey had added in handwriting, possibly linked to vehicle near St. Mary's. No proof. She paused, looking at his old handwriting, a prediction forgotten for nearly 2 decades. Now, with new technology, that prediction could become the real starting point. Before leaving the office that day, Holt stood looking at her new evidence board. In the center was a black and white photo of Aiden Calloway, a young face, a tilted smile, bright eyes. To the right was the image of the black car extracted from the restored video, and below it were the words she had just written, in red pen. Case 07411, active reinvestigation. She stepped back, crossed her arms, looking at the wall of data like a maze, gradually unfolding. What remained of a case thought to be dead was now coming back to life in digital form, and in that brief moment, Verena Holt felt the sensation Dempsey once had. The intuition that the truth, no matter how long it was buried, was always waiting to be found. Outside, the sky darkened. The light rain tapped against the window of the cold case division office, each drop steady, like the rhythm of time. On the computer screen, the image of the black car remained paused, in the final frame, its shadow fading but not disappearing, just like Aiden Calloway's case. After 17 years, it had finally been called by name once again. In the days that followed, the cold case division office was bathed in the blue glow of monitors and the steady hum of cooling fans. Detective Verena Holt virtually lived in her workspace. She reviewed hundreds of old frames, fast-forwarding and rewinding the VHS tape that Dempsey had once mentioned. For the first time, the Aiden Calloway case was brought before the lens of modern technology, and the faint white noise particles from 2007 were gradually reconstructed by artificial intelligence. The AI forensic enhancer software scanned each frame, automatically balancing the light, adjusting the contrast, eliminating noise artifacts, and clarifying object outlines. The blurry silvery footage slowly gave way to a more stable image: the small street in front of Mary's church, the parking lot, and the streak of sunlight slanting through the stone wall. Holt sat motionless, holding a cold cup of coffee, her eyes glued to the screen. Then, in a frame in the left corner, a black sedan sped by. She zoomed in, holding the frame. The software's recognition technology automatically analyzed the length and curve of the car's tail, concluding, vehicle type Hyundai Elantra, 2000. On the license plate, the AI recovered 4 faint characters, 9M3X. A sequence half clear, half blurry, but the first tangible piece of the puzzle. She paused, rewound the video, and watched it again. The morning light, that year, reflected on the car's body like a streak of metal, matching the aluminum composite paint she had found on Aiden's vest. 2 details, separated by nearly 2 decades, now clicked together like fate. Holt quickly scribbled in her notebook, black Hyundai sedan, partial plate, 9M3X. Possible link to paint residue. Without waiting for the video processing to complete, Holt sent an urgent request to the Massachusetts DMV database. She entered all the information: license plate 9M3X, limited to the 2006-2007 production range, registered in Bristol County. Just minutes later, the results appeared on the screen. 21 matching vehicles. Most had been sold, some deregistered, but 7 were still active, including a black Elantra registered in New Bedford, less than 30 miles from Fall River. Owner Rowan Vale, 19 years old in 2007. Holt sat quietly, reading the name multiple times. The DMV system automatically pulled up old records. Vale had been noted by police in a 2006 disturbance at a gas station near Spring Street, but was not charged. No serious criminal record, no weapon history. However, his Elantra remained on the insured vehicle list until 2000, meaning the car existed for at least a year after Aiden's case. She opened the map, marking the route from St. Mary's to New Bedford. The route ran along the Braga Bridge, the exact direction the car in the video had taken. Everything matched, from the direction of travel, the vehicle type, to the paint composition. But Holt remained cautious. In cold cases, a match never means proof. When the screen displayed the final frame, Holt zoomed in one last time, seeing a reflection on the car window, a faint silhouette of 2 people sitting inside. She saved the frame, noting possibly 2 occupants. Alone, she watched the screen dim, a strange feeling stirring within her, a mix of excitement and skepticism. In her report to the unit commander, Holt wrote briefly, recovered enhanced footage from 2000, registered owner Rowan Vale, New Bedford, age 19 in 2007. Potential suspect, pending confirmation. That night, when the office was empty, she remained, the light from the screen illuminating her tired face. She recalled Dempsey's quote she had read in the file. The car is the key. Yes, he was right, but at the time, he didn't have the tools to unlock it. Holt saved the restored video file, naming it Braga footage, recovered, .p4. On the tackboard, beneath Aiden's photo, she pinned a small piece of paper. Rowan Vale, vehicle. The office light automatically timed out, leaving only the weak screen light reflecting on the victim's photo frame. She stood up, put on her coat, and looked back at the databoard covered in red arrows. The path connecting the church to New Bedford was no longer a meaningless stretch. For the first time in 17 years, the Aiden Calloway case had a name. The Massachusetts State Police Evidence Lab was always lit overnight. The sound of spectrometers, laser scanners, and quiet footsteps on the tile floor, a steady rhythm like the heartbeat of science. Detective Verena Holt sat before a screen, her eyes fixed on the graph generated from the paint sample she had submitted. The Raman spectrum curved against the black background, each peak bright and clear. The comparison results just appeared, 99.8% consistency with the paint used on the 2006 Hyundai Elantra line. She leaned back in her chair, her heart beating faster than usual. For nearly 2 weeks since recovering the video, this was the first time forensic technology had confirmed a clear link between the car on the tape and the evidence recovered from Aiden Calloway's vest. No longer a hypothesis or an intuition, but a number. a near absolute probability. Holt zoomed in on the results, rereading the analyst's note: metallic black paint, mica aluminum composite, consistent with OEM coating Hyundai Elantra. The color code ebony black, a small detail, yet powerful enough to tie the mysterious car to the victim. Not stopping there, Holt moved to the test tube containing the polyester fiber sample Dr. Keats had collected from Aiden's jacket. She submitted it to the synthetic materials lab, requesting analysis using Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy. The results appeared as a graph of short oscillations, and this time the waveform perfectly matched the type of fiber used in the seat upholstery of the 2006-2007 Elantra. Material code: dark graphite polyblend. The technical specialist exclaimed, "Same material type, same manufacturer, same manufacturing period. Coincidence is highly unlikely." Holt looked down at the two results placed side by side: one Raman spectrum, one FTIR spectrum. Two overlapping graphs. She realized that every clue Dempsey had suspected in 2007 was now being affirmed by quantitative data. If the paint chip was the car's skin, the polyester fiber was the air in the cabin, both pointed to the same source. She opened Rowan Vale's vehicle file on the computer. The black Hyundai Elantra, VN KHJ 2078-4, registered in New Bedford, insured until mid-2008. No notes of being reported stolen or repainted. She pressed a key, and the system displayed a small note: vehicle sold to scrapyard. The car had been dismantled nearly 15 years ago, but Holt knew that wouldn't erase the evidence. The paint and fiber still existed, and now they were speaking. She contacted the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC Forensic Lab, in Quantico directly, transmitting all the Raman and FTIR spectral data via encrypted link. A few days later, the response report confirmed: no other paint type in the commercial database has a composition that matches the tested sample to the level of 9. The only plausible source: Hyundai Elantra 2000. Holt read every line carefully, then signed the confirmation. She knew that in forensic investigation, the phrase "only plausible" is rarely used, unless there is no other option. And here they had just done that. In the evening, after the technicians had left, Holt still sat in front of the tack board. Aiden's photo was now connected by a red arrow, leading to a picture of an Elantra, next to the handwritten words, "Paint, 99 point." Below that was the name Rowan Vale written in bold marker. She reopened Dempsey's old file, the page with the line he had written 17 years ago. Possibly linked to vehicle near St. Mary's, no proof. Holt looked long at the words "no proof," and quietly said to herself, "Now we do." The next morning, Holt compiled a summary report for the unit commander. Subject, Material Correlation Report Case 0. The polyester fiber sample, recovered from the victim's jacket, completely matches the seat upholstery material of the same model. The only plausible source: the vehicle owned by Rowan Vale, New Bedford. Conclusion: material evidence directly links the victim to the suspect's vehicle. Upon completing the final electronic signature, Holt felt as though she had connected 2 points in time separated by nearly 2 decades. Under her hand, the Aiden Calloway case, once a faint unsolved in the archives, now had a shape, a direction, and a person to confront the past. She saved the report, turned off the monitor, and stood up to look out the office window. The winter light shone through a thick cloud cover, falling in thin thread-like streaks. Below was the city of Fall River, as quiet as ever. But inside Holt, everything had changed. Case 07411 was no longer dormant. It had just been awakened by 2 tiny pieces of matter, a chip of black paint, and a gray fiber, enough to pull the past back. After the material report was approved, Detective Verena Holt understood that what she had was still not enough to charge Rowan Vale. The paint and fiber could prove the victim had contact with the car, but to directly connect Vale to the murder, she needed the weapon, the only thing that could clearly state who pulled the trigger. Holt reopened Dempsey's original file. In an old handwritten note, a faint line: possible firearm disposal, Taunton River South Bank. In 2007, sonar technology was rudimentary, and the scan depth was limited, so they found nothing. Now, with new generation multi-beam sonar equipment, Holt believed the river would have to surrender what it had concealed. She filed an application to resweep the Taunton River, the area between the Braga Bridge and the Mount Hope Bay docks, where Aiden's body had drifted. The proposal was approved within the week. A specialized dive team of the Massachusetts State Police arrived, carrying sonar equipment mounted on a rubber boat. The screen displayed blue waveforms, mapping the riverbed in detail down to every rock. On the second morning of the sweep, a technician called out, "Anomaly at about 12 meters." The image on the screen showed an object about 25 centimeters long, clearly angular. Unlike natural debris or metal pipes, the team leader signaled for 2 divers to descend. Under the thick mud, they located a sealed black nylon bag, heavy in the hand, with the sound of metal when tapped. When pulled up, the mud washed off to reveal the familiar shape of a Glock 17 handgun. Holt bent down, looking at the gun through rubber gloves. The barrel and body were rusted and spotted, but the shape was intact. The grip had a layer of silver tape wrapped around it, likely used to prevent slippage or to obscure fingerprints. Under the light, she noticed the serial number had been filed smooth, a clear sign of disposal. "Someone wanted this weapon to disappear very badly," she murmured. The gun was placed in a specialized evidence box, transferred straight to the forensics lab. Technicians began the process of restoring the serial number, using acid etching, applying a chemical solution to reveal the metallic indentations that the grinder could not completely erase. After nearly 2 hours, the faint numbers gradually emerged. When entered into the ATF database, the system returned the result, registered purchase Rowan Vale, 2000. After nearly 20 years, the gun that shot Aiden had been found, and it bore the name of the person she was hunting. She requested the Glock be sealed according to standard procedure, photographed in its entirety, and an urgent report sent to the state. Before the evidence box was transferred, Holt gently used tweezers to lift a small piece of silver tape around the grip, where skin cells or sweat might be preserved. The tape fragment was placed in a separate DNA bag, labeled Exhibit 12B tape sample. "Send it immediately to the biology lab," she instructed. "We need DNA testing. If there are epithelial cells, I want to know whose they are." When the technical team left the room, Holt remained, looking at the evidence box on the tape, small, cold, yet carrying the weight of 17 years of waiting. In her mind, the case was no longer a collection of disparate facts. It had bone, skin, and form. She opened her investigation journal, quickly writing a few lines: "Recovered firearm, Glock serial number chemically restored. Registered to Rowan Vale, 2000, DNA testing pending." Outside the window, the Taunton River flowed silently under the setting sun. Small waves gently lapped the shore as if exhaling after keeping a secret for too long. Holt watched, whispering almost to herself, "Thank you, Dempsey, you were right. It was still here." In a small glass vial, the piece of silver tape was submerged in a cell separation solution. Under the microscope, dozens of epithelial cell strands became visible, enough to proceed with TouchDNA analysis, a technology that was impossible. Detective Verena Holt sat outside the observation room, listening to the steady hum of the centrifuge. She knew the DNA results were the crux. Finding just one matching genetic sequence would change the entire case. The technician stepped in, handing her a preliminary sheet. 2 male contributors detected, 2 separate DNA samples. More than one person had touched the gun. Holt entered the first sample into the state criminal database. Minutes later, the system displayed the result. The DNA matched Rowan Vale, currently 36, residing in New Bedford. Since 2007, Vale had been noted in 2 minor incidents involving traffic violations and simple battery, but had never been prosecuted. His DNA had been stored from a 2016 scuffle, and now it betrayed him. The second sample surprised Holt more. The genetic sequence matched Silas Marin, 33, a Dartmouth resident and a high school classmate of Aiden Calloway. According to old student records, Vale and Marin had been on the same basketball team as Aiden, sharing a close acquaintance during their teenage years. Both names had briefly appeared in the 2007 file, but were not deeply investigated due to a lack of motive. Now their DNA appeared together on the handgun used in the murder. Holt looked at the 2 names displayed side by side on the screen, a chill running down her spine. For 17 years all data had been mere hypotheses. Now every genetic line connected them with an undeniable truth. At the same time, the ballistics lab sent their comparison report. After cleaning and examining the Glock 17, Technicians test-fired it into a water tank, recovering a sample bullet. When compared under the electron microscope, the rifling on the test bullet completely matched the 9mm projectile recovered from Aiden Calloway's left shoulder in 2007. The slide marks, cuts, and groove marks, every micro detail matched, as if the two bullets were twin brothers. The report concluded, Exhibits in 12A, Glock 17 is identified as the firearm that discharged the bullet recovered from victim Aiden Calloway. 100% match under comparison microscope. Reading that line, Holt felt her heart clench. All the scattered pieces had now formed a picture. The black paint on Aiden's vest matched the paint on Vale's Hyundai Elantra. The gray polyester fiber matched the vehicle's seat material of the same model. The DNA of Vale and Marin was on the gun. Ballistics confirmed that gun fired the fatal bullet. There was no longer any doubt. What Dempsey had left unfinished was now closed. Holt spent the night compiling the comprehensive report, a document over 60 pages long. On the cover page she typed the title, Comprehensive Forensic Linkage Report, Case 07411 Calloway Aiden. Her report was divided into 4 sections: biological evidence, TouchDNA, identifying Rowan Vale and Silas Marin; ballistics evidence, bullet completely matching the Glock; historical analysis, the relationship between the two suspects and the victim. In the conclusion section, Holt wrote, based on physical, biological and ballistic evidence, it can be determined that Rowan Vale was the legal owner of the Glock 17 used in the murder of Aiden Calloway. Silas Marin is directly involved, either as a co-operator or an accessory in disposal. The closed chain of physical, chemical, biological evidence meets the Daubert standard for criminal prosecution. Completing the final signature, Holt leaned back in her chair, looking through the window pane. Outside, the winter sky was dull and gray, with flurries of snow falling. In the brightly lit room, she clearly felt the breath of justice returning after 17 years of silence. She picked up the phone, calling her superior, "Chief, I have everything. I need warrants for Rowan Vale and Silas Marin." On the other end of the line, the chief's voice was low but clear. "Well done, Holt, bring them home." For the first time in months, Holt smiled. Not for victory, but for a silent promise to Aiden, to Ruth Calloway, and to the old detective who once wrote, "The car is the key." Now the door had opened. The few days after the DNA and ballistics warrants were confirmed, Detective Verena Holt began the final step, scene reconstruction. For her, this was more than just procedure. It was a way to see the crime exactly as it happened, second by second, detail by detail. The technical room of the cold case division was darkened, with only the blue light of large monitors illuminating the space. On the desk, Holt opened the 3D reconstruction suite software, inputting all data from the original file, the map of the Mary's Church area, the locations of shell casings, tire marks, and the AI-recovered video segment. The system gradually built a virtual model of that 2007 morning: the brick-paved churchyard, the row of trees, the small parking lot, and the road leading to the Braga Bridge. Next, she inputted the ballistic data. From the ballistics report, the bullet fired from the Glock 17 traveled at an angle of 27 degrees, penetrating Aiden's left shoulder, with a trajectory matching the side exit. Holt marked the bullet's origin point, then allowed the software to simulate the firing angle. A red streak was drawn on the model, extending from the shooter's position to the victim's body. The height of the origin point was estimated at 1.78 meters, 5'1", exactly matching the height in Rowan Vale's identity profile. She had the system combine the video data as well. The image of the black Hyundai Elantra appeared in the model, stopping at the edge of the parking lot, precisely where the ATM camera recorded it. The vehicle's trajectory perfectly matched the tire tracks photographed on the ground. Each match was a confirmation not just of physics, but of intent. Vale had stopped the car where the view was obscured by trees, close enough to shoot, far enough to retreat without being clearly seen by anyone. Holt reviewed the entire simulation from a first-person perspective. The 3D image recreated the moment Aiden stepped out into the side yard, stopping to answer his phone. A shot rang out, his body collapsed, and the black car turned around, disappearing from the frame. When the image froze there, Holt felt a lump in her throat. Though it was a simulation, the scene still sent shivers down her spine, because in that cold world of data, the horror remained palpable. She printed all the results: the 3D map, the bullet trajectory graph, the shooter's height parameters, the vehicle image, and the firing angle. The report was titled, Scene Reconstruction. In the conclusion she wrote briefly, "Reconstruction confirms ballistic and spatial alignment between the shooter's position, vehicle placement, and projectile trajectory. Physical parameters correspond with subject Rowan Vale, height 1m78. Consistent with single-shooter hypothesis." Holt sent the entire file to the Bristol County Prosecutor's Office, along with a request to issue arrest warrants for the two suspects, Rowan Vale and Silas Merrin. In the email to the chief prosecutor she attached a short note: "All evidence corroborates. It's time." That afternoon, upon receiving the approved notification from the prosecutor's office, Holt stood up from her desk. She looked at the wall in front of her, where Aiden Calloway's photo still hung amidst red arrows connecting all the documents. All the lines had now converged on one point: Rowan Vale. She picked up the phone, calling the tactical team. "Get ready, we're heading to New Bedford tomorrow morning." Outside, the wind blew through the window frame, carrying the smell of old rain. Under the twilight, a computer screen still played the 3D simulation of the crime, the image of Aiden standing still in his final moment. For the first time in 17 years the whole story had shape, sound, and the name of the killer. And Holt knew that when the sun rose, justice would begin to move. The atmosphere inside the vehicles was thick, not with tension, but with 17 years of waiting reaching its final minutes. Detective Verena Holt sat in the front seat, looking through the fogged-up window. In the pale light, the Saconet Bridge gradually appeared amidst the sea mist, the place where they would close the journey of a case once thought to be permanently cold. Monitoring the GPS, the surveillance team reported, Rowan Vale was moving onto the bridge, driving a silver sedan. He was completely unaware that he had been under surveillance for the past 2 days. The arrest warrant had been approved by the Bristol County prosecutor overnight, along with a search warrant for his New Bedford residence and Silas Merrin's hideout at a motel in Newport. Holt put on her headset, her voice decisive in the radio. "Alpha 1, hold position. When the suspect vehicle reaches the center span of the bridge, block both ends. Do not fire unless threatened." The wind blew fiercely across the bridge, carrying the sound of waves hitting the stone abutments. The silver sedan appeared exactly on cue. As it proceeded to the middle of the bridge, 2 police cars from both directions immediately sped out, blocking the front and rear. Sirens wailed, red and blue lights flashing brightly across the water. Rowan Vale slammed on the brakes, the car skidding slightly, halting in the middle of the lane. "Rowan Vale, this is the Massachusetts State Police. Put your hands on the steering wheel and exit the vehicle slowly." Holt's voice boomed over the loudspeaker. The car door opened. Vale stepped out, tall and thin, his head bowed. He looked around, slightly raising his hand. The light reflected on a face that was far different from the photo 17 years ago. Hollow, haggard, but his eyes were still alert. 2 officers approached, handcuffed him, and read him his Miranda rights. The entire process was recorded by body cams, flashing lights, interspersed with the clear voice reading, "You have the right to remain silent." In Vale's trunk, the police recovered an old black jacket stuffed into a nylon bag, and a still-sealed box of 9mm. Holt put on gloves and personally opened the box lid. The brand matched the type of ammunition found in Aiden Calloway's body and tooth. She looked at the box of bullets, then at Rowan Vale, her face emotionless, but her eyes saying it all. Simultaneously in Newport, the 2nd Tactical Team raided the roadside motel where Silas Merrin had rented a room for a week. He was arrested without resistance, his face panicked when the warrant was read. In the room they found a travel bag containing a few personal items, some old papers, and a photo of 2 young men in basketball uniforms. Aiden Calloway standing between them, smiling brightly. Holt received the news over the radio. "Merrin is in custody, no resist." She nodded, looking back at Vale, who was now being escorted into the specialized vehicle. A light rain began to fall, spreading a thin mist over the bridge deck. Everyone remained silent for a few seconds, the silence of a long chapter about to close. The convoy turned around, heading toward Boston HQ. In the back compartment of the car, Rowan Vale sat between 2 officers, his eyes lost, his hands still shaking despite being tightly cuffed. Holt sat in the front, not looking at him, just opening her notebook and quickly writing a few lines. Subject Vale apprehended without resistance. Evidence recovered. Black coat. Exhibit 15A box of 9mm rounds. Exhibit 15B. Both secured. At the Boston headquarters, the two suspects were separated for interrogation. Marin maintained a tense attitude, constantly asserting that he just went along, but didn't shoot. Vale remained silent, occasionally giving a brief smirk as if everything was too late to deny. Holt watched him through the one-way glass, sitting upright, looking down at his hands, which had once held the Glock 17 that the police had just recovered from the river. When the technician placed the sealed bag on the table, Holt spoke first. "We have your DNA, Rowan, the paint residue on Aiden's jacket, the bullet in his body. It all points to you." Vale looked up, his eyes cold, but in that moment, his expression briefly showed something strange, not fear but relief. "It took you 17 years for this," he said softly, "and you finally found me." Holt did not reply. She simply motioned for the officer to turn off the camera, then stood up, closing the thick file on the table. Outside in the hallway, the yellow light cast shadows on the cold stone floor. She exhaled a long breath, the heaviness in her chest slowly dissipating. The journey of the Aiden Calloway case had spanned 3 generations of technology, 2 detectives, and thousands of hours of investigation. Now, as the interrogation room door closed, Holt knew the rest of the truth would be told in the courtroom, where justice finally awaited them. Media poured in from everywhere, local newspapers, news channels, and even reporters specializing in cold cases. In the solemn atmosphere of the courtroom, the microphone before the witness stand reflected the white light. After 17 years, the Aiden Calloway case had finally reached the day of trial. For the prosecution, Assistant District Attorney Lauren Keene, whose voice was steady and resolute, stood before the jury and began with simple words. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is not merely a case solved by technology. This is a story about a promise that was not forgotten. A promise that justice, though delayed, would still arrive." In front of her, the 2 defendants sat on the right-hand bench. Rowan Vale, 36, head bowed, hands clasped, and Silas Marin, 33, his face strained, avoiding everyone's gaze. Keene began to present the chain of evidence, each piece meticulously recovered by Detective Verena Holt and the Cold Case Division team. Paint chips on Aiden's blazer matched the original paint of Vale's car with 99.8% certainty. A gray polyester fiber perfectly matched the seat upholstery material used in the tooth. Vale and Marin's DNA were found on the grip tape of the Glock 17, the handgun recovered from the Taunton River. Ballistics confirmed the bullet that killed Aiden was fired from that exact Glock. And finally, a 3D simulation of the crime scene showed the shooter's height, firing angle, and position perfectly coincided with Vale. Every time a piece of evidence was projected onto the large screen in the center of the room, the atmosphere grew heavier. The image of the black car and the grainy VHS tape, followed by the graphic simulation of the shooting, all caused the jury to remain utterly silent. When it was the defense's turn, Vale's lawyer fiercely objected, arguing that modern methods such as AI image restoration and TouchDNA had never been used in the original file, and could be inferred by new technology. They requested the court to review the validity of the evidence according to the Doebert standard, the criteria for evaluating the reliability of scientific evidence in U.S. litigation. Over 2 days of debate, the state's forensic expert team was called to the stand one by one. They presented the standard procedures, from processing the VHS tape to separating DNA on the tape using TouchDNA techniques. Finally, after several hours of deliberation, Judge Margaret Ellis declared, "The technologies used all meet current scientific standards and satisfy the Doebert requirements. The evidence is approved for presentation to the jury." The gavel struck a decision that left the defense counsel with nothing left to cling to. The trial moved to its most critical part, the testimony of Detective Verena Holt. She walked up to the stand, her uniform immaculate, her face calm. Her voice was low and steady as she recounted the 17-year investigation, from the moment she reopened the file in the archives, to the day Vale was arrested on the Braga Bridge. Holt spoke of Dempsey, the detective who had initiated the case, how he had written the final line, "Evidence insufficient," in the 2007 file, and how that very phrase became her motivation to continue. She recounted every discovery: the paint, the fiber, the video, the gun, the DNA. Everything connected into an undeniable chain of logic. In the courtroom, many bowed their heads when they heard Aiden Calloway's name. When the prosecutor asked the final question, "Detective Holt, can you confirm who pulled the trigger?" She looked directly toward Vale, her voice firm. "I can, based on the totality of the evidence. The Glock 17 registered to Rowan Vale was the weapon that killed Aiden Calloway. His DNA was on the grip, the bullet trajectory matched his height, and his car paint was on the victim's clothing. They all speak the same truth: he was the shooter." The courtroom fell silent. Vale sat motionless, his hands clenched. Marin kept his head down. When Holt stepped down from the stand, many people rose, not for the verdict, it had not yet come, but out of respect. After 17 years, the case was no longer a mystery, but a testament to a belief that justice, though delayed, could still be awakened by patience and science. The judge announced a recess to prepare for the sentencing phase. Outside, the wind from the Taunton River swept across the courthouse portico, carrying the scent of salt water and the distant tolling of St. Mary's church bells. In that moment, Holt understood that the truth had finally been heard. The Bristol County courtroom that day was so quiet one could clearly hear the slight tap of a pen on the desk. After nearly 3 weeks of trial, all the evidence, all the testimonies and arguments had been presented. Everything now converged on the final moment, when Judge Margaret Ellis held the sentence in her hands. Rowan Vale stood at the right-hand podium, his face pale, his eyes empty. Silas Marin stood next to him, head bowed, his hands trembling in the steel handcuffs. Below, the public gallery was packed. In the front row, Ruth Calloway, Aiden's mother, sat in silence, her frail hands clasped together. Next to her was Isla, Aiden's sister, her face set but her eyes red-rimmed. The judge began, her voice resonating evenly in the heavy atmosphere. Having reviewed all the evidence, witness testimonies, and expert conclusions, the court finds that the actions of the 2 defendants causing the death of Aiden Calloway were intentional, premeditated, and conscious. She paused, looking directly at Vale. "Rowan Vale, you are charged with second-degree murder. The court sentences you to 35 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for the first. Your actions took the life of an innocent person and caused the victim's family to endure suffering for nearly 2 decades." Vale showed no reaction. There was only a slight twitch at the corner of his eye, as if exhaustion had surpassed even fear. The judge turned to Marin. "Silas Marin, you are charged with manslaughter, with the aggravating circumstances of assisting in concealing the crime and destroying evidence. The court sentences you to 25 years in prison, with the possibility of parole, after serving 8. Marin burst into tears, his head dropping, whispering something no one could clearly hear. Perhaps it was an apology, or just a belated sigh. As Judge Ellis read the final line, "Criminal case file number 0, Rowan Vale and Silas Marin, is officially closed." The courtroom was plunged into silence. Ruth Calloway gently bowed her head, her hands tightly gripping each other. Isla placed a hand on her mother's shoulder. Neither of them looked happy, but something in their eyes had lightened, as if an invisible burden had been lifted after 17 years. Prosecutor Lauren Keene approached and bowed to the family. "We did everything to bring the truth to light," she said softly. Ruth merely nodded gently, tears streaming down, but her voice was calm. "I know. Thank you for not forgetting." In the back row, Detective Verena Holt quietly stood up. She looked around the courtroom, where a portrait of Aiden Calloway hung on the large screen, the face of a 20-year-old man, a simple smile, bright eyes. Holt felt her heart constrict. For her, this was not just a sentence for 2 criminals, but an affirmation that time, no matter how cruel, could not erase the truth. As the session ended, the sound of moving chairs echoed throughout the room. Vale was escorted out first, Marin following behind. Reporters' cameras flashed, capturing the moment they were led away. 2 figures slowly swallowed by the courthouse hallway, where the late afternoon light streamed through the tall glass windows. Ruth stood a long while before her son's photograph. "Aiden, you see now," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Finally they know who you were." Outside the courthouse, the wind from the Taunton River blew past, carrying the scent of salt and the distant train whistle. Holt stepped onto the portico, gazing up at the pale gray sky. In her hand was the file, stamped red, case closed. She knew justice never returns what was lost, but at least it had been served. The Aiden Calloway case, case 007411, officially closed, leaving a long silence in the history of Massachusetts investigation. A chapter ended, but for those who remained, the memory would stay, just as the Taunton River continues to flow, carrying the story of a young man, and the belief that no truth can be buried forever. News of the sentencing of Rowan Vale and Silas Marin spread rapidly, not just within Bristol County but across the entire state of Massachusetts. Major newspapers published a series of articles with the same headline, Justice After 17 Years, the Aiden Calloway Case. The image of the young man's smile reappeared on the front pages, not as a victim in an old file, but as a symbol of the belief that justice, though delayed, could still be found. In Fall River, the atmosphere in the days following the trial was filled with emotion. The local community, which had buried the story for nearly 2 decades, now came together to organize a memorial for Aiden at the very place the tragedy began, St. Mary's Church. That morning, hundreds of residents gathered in the red brick courtyard, among the changing maple trees. They lit candles, placed white flowers and quietly looked towards the steps where Aiden last stood in his life. During the ceremony, the church priest read a prayer, his voice warm and deep in the quiet space. Today we not only remember a life lost, but also honor patience and faith, that the truth, though buried, will surface like water. A bronze memorial plaque was installed right at the church entrance. Engraved on it was the simple inscription, "In memory of Aiden Calloway, 1987-2007, loved, remembered and finally found." Under the morning sunlight, the etched letters shone like a belated tribute from the entire city. The press called this case a symbol of the modern forensic era. The Boston Ledger published an editorial, "The Aiden Calloway Case demonstrates the power of forensic science in connecting the past and the present." Where justice was once obscured by the limits of technology, now, artificial intelligence and DNA analysis have reopened doors that seemed permanently shut. In a brief interview, Detective Verena Holt said simply, "It all started with a forgotten file." No technology can replace human perseverance, but there are tools that help us see what the naked eye once missed. Beyond the solemn news reports, the Fall River community also sought to turn the memory into something positive. The Calloway family, with the help of local authorities, established the Aiden Calloway Scholarship Fund for local high school students, especially those pursuing science and technology fields. If Aiden were alive, Ruth said at the fund's launch, he would want to help other kids build their own future. Now we will do that for him. At the state level, the Massachusetts State Police announced the reopening of 5 other cold case files using the same forensic protocol that solved Aiden's case. They called it the Calloway Protocol, a new method combining AI, material analysis, and TouchDNA, regarded as a model for cold case investigations nationwide. In a press conference, a police spokesperson said, "We didn't just find the truth for one case, we found a path for hundreds of others." Fall River gradually returned to its peaceful rhythm, but it was no longer a town shrouded in the silence of memory. On the Braga Bridge, people noticed white bouquets silently left by someone each year. No one claimed them, but everyone knew they belonged to Aiden. At the end of a documentary aired on state television, the frame slowly shifted to the Taunton River in the morning. The water was still, sunlight reflecting through a thin mist. The female narrator's voice came on, deep but warm. For 17 years the town waited. The river finally spoke. The camera slowly panned across the flowing river, then paused at the memorial plaque in front of St. Mary's Church. Distant church bells chimed, blending with the rhythm of the water, like Fall River's answer to the past. Justice had arrived, and memory had finally found peace. The story of Aiden Calloway reminds us that very small choices, made in seemingly ordinary moments, can create decades-long consequences, and also shows why community, technology and perseverance remain the 3 pillars that help justice function in the United States. Aiden disappeared after a funeral at St. Mary's in Fall River, and only a vague clue, the shadow of a black Hyundai Elantra on a VHS tape, forced the entire town to wait. The solution did not come from solitary intuition, but from a disciplined combination. AI image restoration to read the blurred 9M3X. Raman spectroscopy to match the ebony black paint layer, FTIR to match the polyester car seat fiber, TouchDNA to uncover the identities of Rowan Vale and Silas Marin on the Glock 17 grip tape, and 3D simulation to confirm the firing angle matched the shooter's height. The practical lesson for us today: invest in digital citizenship and community safety, install home cameras with cloud storage, preserve the crime scene and call 911 instead of trying to manage it alone. Immediately record the time location when witnessing an incident, and be ready to cooperate with authorities, because even a blurred frame can save an entire case. For local governments and schools, the story encourages prioritizing budgets for forensic technology and training investigators according to the Calloway Protocol, combining AI, materials, DNA, while also opening scholarships, like the Aiden Calloway Fund, to nurture a new generation of engineers, data analysts, and forensic technicians. And at the individual level, we need to talk openly about gun violence and ownership responsibility, safety checks, reporting theft, and proper gun locking. By the Taunton River, the memorial plaque does not just close a case, it reminds us that justice requires daily persistence, from family, neighbors, to those silently sitting behind screens analyzing data. If you believe that the truth, no matter how long it has been buried, deserves to be found, please subscribe to continue our journey of unraveling cases that seem to have been forgotten. Thank you for following the story of Aiden Calloway. See you in the next video, where justice will once again be awakened.